Hi everyone, my name is Laura Mittelman. I am a first grade teacher at the Brigantine Community School in Brigantine, New Jersey, and welcome to today's session on blended learning in kindergarten through second grade. All right, let's get started. All right, so before we begin, I figured I'd give you guys some facts about myself as opposed to just jumping in and you're like, who is this person giving us a presentation? So some facts about who I am as an educator. I am a first grade teacher at the Brigantine Community School in Brigantine, New Jersey, as I previously mentioned. I am the general education teacher in our first grade inclusion class, so I worked closely alongside of a special education teacher in my room as well. So prior to teaching in Brigantine, I taught first grade for 4 years in DC Public Schools, which is one of our nation's largest public school districts. So I learned a ton there. And while I was there during my tenure, I have led professional development sessions on family engagement, blended learning, and district-wide grade level content sessions on both English language arts and math. I've used a plethora of blended learning programs in my tenure over the years. I have used Lexia Core 5, ST Math, Think Central, Zern, eSpark, Epic Books, just to name a few. So chances are if your school has a blended learning program, I've probably heard of it. Some personal facts about me. I was born and raised in Mittelman, New Jersey, so I'm a Jersey girl through and through. I currently live in Ventnor, New Jersey. I graduated from Catholic University with a bachelor's degree in elementary education, and I received my master's degree from Penn State University in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in STEM. So through that experience, I also learned about a lot of new blended learning programs, so that was great. I got married in June of 2019 in Atlantic City, New Jersey. My husband is a speech language pathologist in Egg Harbor Township School District. So if there's any EHT Eagles out there, if you know Mr. Max. I also love living at the beach. In the summer, I just love to read and exercise to recharge my batteries. Unfortunately, I think the picture of my husband and I got cut off in the top right-hand corner of the screen. I'm not sure if you guys can see that or not, but on the top left-hand side of the screen, which is all that really matters, you can see myself and our golden retriever, Holly. All right, so that's enough about me. Let's get started in our session today. So just some general brainstorming before we begin. This is normally how I start an in-person professional development session, but since we are virtual, we will just have to do it from home. What words and images come to mind when you hear the words blended learning? So take a second, if you have a notebook and a pencil or a piece of paper and a pen around you, just jot down some words and images that come to mind when you hear the words blended learning. You can even use the notes in your phone if that's what you have. Give you a few seconds to do that. And what does blended learning look like in your classroom, in your school, and in your district? So do you have blended learning programs? Are you utilizing them? If so, do you use them daily, weekly? What does blended learning look like? And after you finish jotting that down, what does blended learning look like now in this time of remote teaching and learning? So do you feel like you're using it more frequently, less frequently? Take a second to jot that answer down. And on the right, those are a picture of my first graders from last year. Can't see their faces, but they were such a great group, as every class is. So throughout this presentation, you'll be seeing some of my former classes and how we use blended learning. So you'll get to see it in real life action through pictures. So before I get into the meat of this session, I wanted to explain to you a little bit why this session pertains so heavily to kindergarten through second grade. I feel as an educator in the early elementary years that blended learning looks a lot different in these early grade levels, right? Like, you know, by the time they get to the upper elementary, middle school years, the kids can log onto a Chromebook independently, and there's not so much setup and teaching behind how to use a computer. However, in these early foundational grades, not only are we teaching them how to use a blended learning program to support their learning, but we're also teaching them how to use a computer. So I'm going to go through during this session some tips for inside the classroom when we hopefully return, and some virtual learning tips for how I've been using blended learning. But that's why it's geared towards these grade levels specifically. But anyone can get some good tips from this video, I hope. So after you've jotted down your answers, we're going to revisit them at the end, and I hope that your answers will improve or change if they're not great already, or you'll at least have one great takeaway. I hope many more, but at least one going forward for remote learning and blended learning. All right, let's get into our session. So our session description, what are we going to do today? Real quick, blended learning, if you're not familiar with it, it combines traditional teaching methods, so in the classroom, with digital learning to differentiate education for our students. Blended learning is an awesome resource for teachers. It especially is really useful during this time of remote teaching and learning to ensure that students' individual needs are being met. Okay, so they're accessing content on their level. That's huge because we're not in the classroom to do it for them, right? So while blended learning, it can never ever replace the knowledge and work of all of us hardworking classroom teachers. It is definitely an excellent supplemental tool for learning, especially when it's used correctly. So again, blended learning enhances differentiating through meeting our students at their individual learning levels. Huge. I'm hopeful that through this session, you'll have 4 big takeaways. New ways to use blended learning programs inside and outside of the classroom, how to set classroom norms for blended learning, different components of blended learning, and how to use blended learning to inform individual and small group instruction. So those are our 4 big takeaways from this session, okay? So on the right, you'll see a picture of one of my previous classrooms. When I taught down in Washington, D.C., I was lucky enough to have a Donors Choose grant awarded to me for 5 classroom iPads. So that's how we used our blended learning programs there. Get into that a little bit more, but just wanted to give you a little context. Our session objectives today. So being that it is a 30-minute session, we're just gonna focus on 3 objectives and trying to hone in on those really well. The first one is to explain how blended learning can be used inside and outside of the classroom. So hopefully when we return to our classrooms in September, and also how can we use it now during this time of remote teaching and learning? So some ways I use it throughout the year are through centers, homework instruction. I work with resource teachers on our blended learning programs. I also use it for individual instruction during this time of remote teaching and learning. Our second objective is to break down some key components of blended learning programs. So how to use teacher and parent reports, setting norms for blended learning in your classroom, and how to teach students to use blended learning independently, which is huge at these early elementary levels. So that's why our session is, again, geared towards kindergarten through 2nd grade. And our third objective is to discuss how blended learning can be used for individual and small group instruction. So again, on the right, another example of one of my students using blended learning. Get into all that now. All right. So our first objective, blended learning inside and outside of the classroom. So let's start with inside the classroom, and we hopefully return to those classrooms in September. So some ways that I use blended learning inside of the classroom, the biggest way I use it is through workstations. So every day we have 2 sets of stations. In the morning is our literacy block. So we have literacy stations. There are 4 stations that kids rotate through every day. They go to word work, independent reading, writing, and our blended learning. Right now we're using Epic Books for blended learning in the classroom. So it's just a great way for kids to get exposure to fluency by following along with the books on the computer. So while the activities change weekly in my stations, the content of what they're doing or the premise does not. So word work is correlated with phonics, independent reading, just as it sounds. Students are reading their book buddy bags, and writing, self-explanatory. They're working on the writing projects and blended learning. Now in the afternoon is our math block. So again, we have 4 math stations: fluency, review station, lesson extension station, and a blended learning station. Same thing. My kids rotate through all 4 centers daily, and the work changes weekly of what they're doing, but the focus of the center does not, okay? So why I love stations and how the biggest way it helps me with blended learning is stations allow me to meet with individual students and also small groups. So these are things like guided reading and guided math, and also conferring if you're using Lucy Calkins' curriculum. So through kids working on their blended learning programs at the stations, and they know they're seamless, their transitions, they're great, they can do it without me. If I just stood back and watched, my classroom can run itself when it comes to their workstations. So blended learning is a great resource for kids to get onto workstations, being that they're not generally between, each station is 10 to 15 minutes maximum. So they're not on that computer program all day. So it's just quick glimpses of the program while they're still learning. So they're able to focus on it. So that's the biggest way workstations are workstations are the biggest way I use blended learning in my classroom. Another way in which when we're in school, I use blended learning is through resource teachers. So for example, I have some students that get pulled for intervention. During those times, I can pull the work that they're working on with their resource teacher. Maybe they get on their 10 minutes with their resource teacher, or I can go on through the teacher report, which I'll talk about in a little bit, see what they're working on. If there's something they're struggling on, I can give that standard to the resource teacher and have them work with them on that lesson. Again, also on the flip side, if there's something I see that they need to be challenged on, can also pull that data, and the resource teacher has my login so they can go in, pull that data themselves, and work with the students. So that's just another idea of how to incorporate blended learning outside of the classroom. So during this time of remote teaching and learning, one of the biggest ways through remote teaching and learning, and also when we're in session in school, I use it during homework. So each week, my students receive a packet. The work packet has both ELA and math activities, enough for every night of the week. And then their additional assignment is to get on their blended learning program for whatever the recommended time. Obviously, in the beginning of the year, it's less, and we build our way up through the end of the year. So it kind of gets a little bit of everything. It gets that technology component, while it also gets, their written component. And I've never had parents ever say that they didn't like it. They really enjoy it. The blended learning program helps me because I can go on a Monday night and see what they worked on that night and apply it to the classroom on Tuesday. So that's an idea. During this time of virtual learning, I have relied on blended learning so much, being that so much of our assessment in the classroom is formal and informal, and we are assessing at all times. No longer able to do that when I'm doing it through, a Zoom session, and I can't see their work that's in front of them. So through virtual learning, I've been able to assign, track, and monitor students' individual progress through blended learning, which is huge. I know they're still getting what they need. I know exactly where they are, what they're working on, how I'm going to push them for those second grade standards and get them ready. So it's awesome. We're working with a program called eSpark right now, which I actually just piloted during this time of blended learning, just to give it a chance to see how it works. And it's amazing. It's both reading and math. I can go on, I assign my kids, they're called quests. I go on and assign them their quests. I go every day, I'm able to go on and track, see, how they're working, how they're moving, what standards specifically they're working on. And then I've been using this information to create mini lessons, whether they're whole group or during my one-on-one session. For example, something that my class as a whole was struggling with, that the blended learning program, the teacher report showed me from eSpark, is that time to the half hour was something they're really working on. So I was able to use this information from the blended learning program and then create and record a mini lesson of myself teaching time to the half hour and upload it to my YouTube page for my whole class to benefit from. Hugely helpful. I don't know that I would have gotten that information from just trying to teach via the computer. Another way I've been using it is through students one-on-one sessions. I'll go in before I do my one-on-one Zoom or conferring with a student, and I'll see what they're working on. If there's something they're struggling, or vice versa, if there's something they need to be pushed on or challenged on, I can go in and I use that information from the teacher report on our blended learning program to inform my one-on-one session. So it's intentional, it's purposeful, and I know exactly where my kids are. So that is our first objective. Moving on to our second objective. So when we hopefully soon return to our classrooms, we have to establish classroom norms for blended learning. So our second objective is key components of blended learning. Norming for anything in the classroom, as we all know, is essential, especially for blended learning. As I mentioned before, we're not dealing with an age group who is able to pick up a computer and know exactly what to do with it. They're young. We have to coach them and we have to teach them to get them there. So one of the biggest things that has helped me to support my blended learning instruction inside of the classroom over the years is to create a space in my classroom for blended learning to occur. So that picture in the bottom of the PowerPoint is a picture of my classroom currently. As you can see, there's 6 Chromebooks set up on 2 tables. They're nicely spaced out, and there's headphones just hung up right there. The biggest thing that's helped me is having those Chromebooks up and running, chairs ready to go. You don't necessarily, I did the same thing when I had iPads. You don't want to have the computers in a bucket and have kids grab it because they're wasting time, right? Whenever they get to their, workstations or however you may use it, you don't want kids to have to waste time on the setup of a device. Having them set up, ready to go is hugely, hugely helpful. I can't stress that enough. So creating a space in your classroom for blended learning to occur is like the first norm I would do when we hopefully get back into our classrooms in August. Now, when our kids hopefully arrive back in September, the way I like to launch blended learning is during the first month, 4 to 6 weeks of school, I like to teach my kids about blended learning. So what it is, why we use it, how it helps us, and also my expectations, right? I actually create a checklist of my expectations for students and go through them and make sure I've taught them so I know I've covered them. So for example, how to sign on. You're welcome to create your own checklist from this too. How to sign on to the program, how to get their assignments on the program, how to rotate to the computers during stations, like am I just pulling out a chair and plopping down? Do I have to sit up nice? My posture matters, sit up nice and tall, place my headphones over my ears. These are all things we have to teach in the first 4 to 6 weeks. My expectations for kids while they're at the computers during blended learning. So as you can see, I have the computers spaced out. My workstation groups are in groups of 4. So my kids know something I coach them to do. They are at every other computer. So there's always that middle computer in between them. So they're not leaning over and looking at their neighbor's computer. Granted, class sizes don't always allow that. I've worked with a huge class size down in DC. I get it, but just something to think about going forward. How can you be intentional in creating that space for blended learning? So these are all things that you have to teach and go over. I model it on the smartboard, and I actually take one of the students' logins and I practice with them, right? So I take my computer, I put it on the smartboard, I teach them how to log in with the computer, and then I show them how to find their assignments. I pretend I'm a student and I say, am I doing this right? And they'll say no or yes. Just really honing in on your expectations about blended learning. As I said, they don't know how to just grab a device, pick it up, and do what you expect of them. You have to teach that. So once we get things rolling and we have workstations again, first 4 to 6 weeks is all just a rollout. So I'd say by the middle of October, this is what I expect. So during those first 4 to 6 weeks, I actually write the students' usernames and passwords on their station folders that they bring with them to each workstation. Both my kids have a literacy center folder and a math center folder. And at each workstation, whether it's literacy or math, there's some type of deliverable that they're working on. So while I'm meeting with a small group at my kidney table, I know that I can check each day and open their folder to see what exactly they were working on, because there's some form of writing, paper, whatever it may be. I can go in and track their progress of what they're doing at stations. That way I know it's intentional. So they bring these folders with them to every station. So they write their usernames and their passwords. A little tip about passwords is a lot of programs will let you go back and reset the password to something friendly. So for example, if you use Go Math, which I know most of the state does, Think Central is the blended learning program or component that goes with eMath. Go Math. So I go in and I reset their passwords. Every kid has the same password. It's Math1. Easy, friendly, they can get rolling. So while their login information, their username is going to be different, their password is going to all be the same. So that's been hugely helpful. All of this just helps to maximize learning time during workstations. Those transitions, they're tight, they're neat, they're up, they're running, and they get to their stations to get right to work. Now, as students become more comfortable with logging onto their program, I will create and assign a tech helper to assist with students who need more support logging on. So there's always going to be those kids, which it's fine, it's a classroom, it's nature of what we do. So there'll always be those students who say, I forgot, can you help me? So instead of you having to get up from your small group or individual session that you're working on, assign a tech helper. That student who's really comfortable with blended learning goes over, shows the student how to enter in their username, how to enter in their password, and helps them get on. You can keep teaching, just it keeps everything rolling with less interruptions. So that's definitely important. Another way to get your class really invested during blended learning, and it's been working for me even during this time of remote teaching and learning, is creating community classroom incentives with blended learning. So each blended learning program is different. Some run by the minute, some also run by quests. So for example, if we meet our weekly quest quota that the class is supposed to meet, the kids get 15 minutes of free play on a school approved site. Something fun. I've also done in the past where we use Lexia Core 5, and that prescribes that each kid is on the computer for 60 minutes. So if the kids meet their 60 minutes a week, every kid through homework, through blended learning instruction in the classroom, then we've done, if they meet each week we meet every assignment for a month, we get a pizza party. Get creative, have fun. Kids love it. It helps to really get them invested in blended learning. They already love it since they're on the computer. So it just gives them more of a purpose to make sure that they're working hard on the computer and not just clicking. All right. So our second key component of blended learning is this thing that you'll see on my right, which are reports for teachers and parents. So all blended learning programs have a report section. Whether, the report is, all of them look different. It depends on the program. As I mentioned, Lexia Core 5 is a minute requirement. It requires each student to be on Lexia for 60 minutes a week. While what I'm using right now is a program called eSpark. It's a quest. It wants students to complete 50 quests per week. They're all different. However, these reports are hugely, hugely helpful in informing your teaching for blended learning. So on the right side of the screen, you'll see my current student report for blended learning. So this is how I've been teaching during, one of the ways I've been teaching during remote teaching and learning. So you can't see my students' names, but you can see that every single one of my students is working on a different level. They're working on different grade levels. They're working on different standards. It's individualized. It's so awesome. So these teacher reports are huge. They show how much time a student took on a particular topic or standard. They show where a student is excelling or struggling. And they also give you lesson ideas and resources for individual and group instruction. So for example, this is what I'm talking about. When we first started doing this, I saw time to the half hour was popping up on 7 or more of my students. So that's how I used it to inform my virtual mini lesson of time to the half hour. Hugely helpful in going in and meeting one-on-one. I can see exactly what they're working on and pull that. So a lot of blended learning programs also will have lesson ideas. So when you're in the classroom, you can do it virtually, but sometimes they have like worksheets they have to print out. But a lot of them have lesson ideas that give you, an extension as a teacher. If, so-and-so is struggling with the concept of blends, it'll give you a little mini lesson. You can pull them to the table and you're good. So that's teacher reports. Parent reports, they can include weekly minute activity requirements. So letting kids know how much more time they need or how many more quests they need for that week. Hugely helpful for homework instruction. So the parent knows exactly what the kid needs. They're not logging on a Thursday and finding out their kid needs 60 minutes. It's great. They can track their progress all week. It also shows student mastery. Like I said, areas of improvement, helpful for parents to know exactly where their kids are, what standard they're working on, what grade level. It's awesome. And it also helps them with skills for students to practice at home. It gives them ideas of just quick lessons. For example, one I can think of was like blending nonsense words, like CDC words in the beginning of the year. It gave parents, 10 words they can write down on flashcards and have them work with the kid. Awesome. Some programs even have worksheets, as I mentioned, Lexia did, that teachers can print out, and I can print them out for homework based on that kid's individual level. And it's already differentiated for you. It's awesome. So that was our second objective. Moving on to our third and final objective. Sorry, trying to keep it under 30 minutes, is utilizing blended learning for individual and small group instruction inside of the classroom. I use those results from the teacher report, as you just saw on the previous screen, to inform my weekly groups or individual meetings or individual conferring sessions. For example, if there's a group of students or one student struggling with diagraphs, I'm going to use the designated lesson that the blended learning program gives me and meet with my kids at my kidney table during workstation time. I might come up with my own lesson too that I know works. However, that information that blended learning gives me is so helpful in knowing what my students need. So again, I will meet with them during workstation time just so my kids can go to that computer, apply what they learned at my kidney table directly to what they're working on at blended learning. These lessons, as I previously mentioned, are also useful for resource teachers and support staff to use with students as well. Great intervention tool. Gives you a lot of data. I know for a lot of us, we have to write intervention reports. Gives you tons of data for those intervention reports. They're useful. Virtual learning, as I mentioned, blended learning has been tremendously helpful in ensuring that all the students are getting the individual instruction that they need during this time. So it's already individualized. The work, that part's done for you, the hard part. So I've been assigning phonics, reading, and math lessons on eSpark, as I mentioned, and I track my students' progress daily. I also use their progress and from the teacher reports to inform, as I mentioned, my whole group mini lessons, so that time to the half-hour lesson. Also, before I sign on with a kid, a one-on-one session on Zoom, can see what they're working on. We can move them forward that way. Blended learning is definitely helping me during this time of remote teaching and learning to differentiate more than ever. It's hugely, hugely helpful. So definitely utilize it if you aren't already. All right, cram that all into 30 minutes. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope this session has helped you learn new techniques for using blended learning, both inside your classroom when we hopefully get back in September, and also outside during these last few weeks of school. I hope that you'll revisit those questions from the beginning of the PowerPoint. I don't have enough time to do it now, and see how your learning has changed. See if your answers are different, or I'm hoping they're more positive and you have takeaways. Another point, try something new. There are a ton of free resources right now. It's a great time to try a new program. And then if you end up enjoying it, maybe your school will purchase the program next year. It can't hurt to try. It's just, blended learning is hugely helpful, especially now. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. My email is on the PowerPoint. Even if we get back to school, when we go back to school in September and you're trying to roll out blended learning, you're like, hey, what did that lady say? Feel free to shoot me an email then. I'm happy to help. I've done blended learning in different school districts, different states, and I love it. I've learned a lot about it. So I'm happy to help you in any way I can. And we're almost there. So have a healthy and successful end of your school year and a great summer. And that picture on the right is actually from my honeymoon earlier this year. My husband and I were fortunate enough to travel to Hawaii. That picture is like the background on my computer and my phone. So when things get a little stressful during this time, I like to just take a deep breath and look at that picture. So I hope it has a calming and enjoying effect for you guys as well. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and good luck. I hope blended learning is awesome for you. See you guys.